Hello, welcome to our Friday lunchtime drop-in with the wonderful author Beth Spencer. This is part of our Writers at Work series at the University of Sydney. My name's Belinda Castles. I'm a lecturer in creative writing and the degree director of the Master of Creative Writing at Sydney. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm joining you from the unceded lands of the Gadigal people, and I pay my respects to elders past and present. I extend this respect to the people of the lands that you're joining us from today. I'm extremely pleased to welcome Beth Spencer and the glittering crowd that she brings with her. So I will briefly introduce Beth and then we will expand on her literary biography as we go. So Beth's books include How to Conceive of a Girl, Random House, 1996, which, side note, Beth, when I came to Australia, I started working at Random House and I remember there being piles of your books lying around, which was runner-up for the Steel Rudd Award, and Vagabondage, a verse memoir about a year living in a camper van, which we will definitely discuss. Her awards include the Dinny O'Hearn Fellowship, Varuna Writers Fellowship, a Create New South Wales grant, and several fellowships from the Literature Board of the Australia Council. She's written for The Age, essays on a range of subjects. Her work has been performed on ABC Radio National, and she was an occasional interviewer on Climactic podcast, and I have cut the biography down substantially, but we will get into things. So welcome, Beth. It's wonderful to have you.
Thank you very much. And it's great to be here. And I'd like to acknowledge the Guringai people, the Central Coast, who are the traditional owners here, and with gratitude for their continuing care, and acknowledge the country itself. I think it's, the country contributes to me every day. So
thank you, Beth. Okay, so I thought we would begin with a reading, if that's all right with you. To warm us up.
I'll get myself organised. So this is just a short bit from a long piece at the end of the Age of Fibs called The True Story of an Escape Artist, which was actually commissioned by Beth Yarp many years ago. So thank you, Beth. And for a book called Family Pictures. And the brief was to write about your family using photos. And just about everybody else was smart enough to write about dead people, but I foolishly chose 5 photos that were about my siblings and parents, and as they were going through a very difficult time. So it was a challenging piece to write. So this is just a little fragment from it. In my fantasy stable under the house, I had a superlative horse named Ajax, after the cleaning powder, a coal black stallion. Of course, I mean, all superlative horses are stallions, aren't they? I thought that's what the word meant. Taking hold of my hay-band reins, and using the slats as stirrups, I climb up and away we go. Sometimes if there is a fire or a robbery, I have to run and leap up on him, and he is moving before my bottom hits the saddle. I never fall off, even when we have to jump 6-foot-high fences, although I kind of tip forward in my seat and have to balance myself back up again. Good on you, Ajax. Now run like the wind. My mother appears suddenly at the back door with a basket of washing on her hip. I stand with my hand resting lightly on the little gate, just going under the house to get something. I crawl back under the house. I like the spot right up under the kitchen where it is too low for anyone else. Time to go to sleep now, Ajax. That's it. Good boy. Be calm now. That's it, Ajax. Sometimes he would be restless and knock in his stable at night. I would get up and take him food, some oats. Sometimes he just needed a pat or to hear my voice close and warm and breathy in his ear. Are you allowed to take just the family you want and leave the rest? My mother is spring cleaner and caretaker of the family history. She tidies regularly, throwing out the photos that don't fit into the albums, the ones that don't look like their subjects or which are no longer relevant to our 90s version family. The ex-wives, for instance, kept in a plastic bag in the bottom of her bedroom cupboard. Sometimes I rescue the little bits, the bones, the debris, the scattered pieces and cast-offs, and take them home back to Sydney for safekeeping. I like to sort through them. I don't put my photos in albums. I keep them jumbled together in a big plastic bag. That way, every time you take them out, a whole new history unfolds, a whole new arrangement and order. I'm a junk collector, a steptoe, like your father. Every family member is a competing family historian. I make no claims to be objective. I'm right in the thick of my family, knee deep, up to my neck, over my head in some places. And I'm a habitual fiction writer, a rewriter of history. I don't even remember which bits are true anymore and which bits I've made up. So perhaps this is the time to put in a disclaimer. Any resemblance to people living or dead is purely relative. This is the view from my house, or one of the views. Have your salt shaker ready. Enter at your own risk. Careful now, Ajax. Don't bite the visitors.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Beth. I can see.
I just realised I haven't got a headset in, and I have better sound if I do. So I'm just going to.
Okay, all right. I'm going to talk to you while you're wandering around. That was a great reading to open with because it seemed classic Beth Spencer in various of its themes. You know, something that has struck me as I've been reading your work is the space that you give for the perspective of a younger self, the seriousness with which you give that. I was enjoying your story about the monkeys and I felt that to be true. And those secret spaces of childhood and watching and listening, and also this sort of current that seems to run through your work to do with the sort of the interest, the kind of motivation we have in making stories, where they come from, the possessiveness around them, perhaps, and the way that they're related to a place in the family or a place in the relationship. All of those things present in that piece, which was lovely. But I'll just wind back a bit before I draw you on some of those themes. So let's fill out a little bit. How did you come to be a writer? It sounds like in this sort of hiding in the horse stable that you were born a writer. Is that the case?
Well, it's interesting when you were sort of talking at the start about this career and everything, and I was thinking it sounds like this lovely trajectory of the straight line, whereas, you know, those memes that have the sort of, this is what we think progress is and this is what it really is. It's more like that. It's sort of a lot of ups and downs, and you know, just getting back up on the horse when you get kicked off, and which is a relevant metaphor for me because my father was a farrier. So my father was a farrier. I was the youngest of 6 children, mostly boys, and grew up in a dairy farm. So we didn't have many books, and I was never read to as a child or anything like that. So TV was actually, I was a TV baby, and TV was my first narrative language. So I'm very influenced by TV, and I can see that in my style. And when I did start to read, I discovered my mum's 1920s Sunday school prize books. And so I had this sort of modern stuff of the TV, and then there's really old religious books. And there was Little Women. And so I read Little Women, and Jo March is just such an amazing, powerful figure, in not just in how that, you know, you could be a writer, that there was this thing, you know, reading meant so much to me when I did find books, and that you could be this thing called a writer, and that you could be it within the family and save the family. And also just the way she managed to sort of work within the gender constraints on her, but find a way to be herself. And so I grew up in a very working class family, very gendered, very, very gendered family. And my destiny was to have children, basically, and work was physical work. It was hard physical work, and certainly sitting on your bum writing is not work. And I think it's actually taken me a lifetime to kind of work through the inner conflicts that did. So a lot of writing about these experiences has helped, but it's also that I've become more and more aware of that conflict inside about that who I am as a writer and whether it's okay to be a writer. And it's like that when I was a child, I kind of gave myself permission to be a writer, unconsciously, of course, as long as it made money, because that's what you have to do. That's what work is. It makes money. And as long as it was so earth-shatteringly important that it was worth not doing all the other things, and as long as it was back-breaking work. And so I think my early years, I kind of tried to fulfill those things in a way that sort of just pretty much crushed me. So it's been a kind of a convoluted process too. But I think it's been a search to sort of get more ease with writing, more joy with writing all the way through. So
yes, that all reminds me of the ways that writing is so often a struggle with the self, and everything
absolutely
that goes into the self, and that writing is sort of it's the material output of all sorts of kind of historical and psychological processes that are not really known to ourselves till we see them on the page, sometimes later. Thank you, Beth. So your latest book is The Age of Fibs, which I've been enjoying very much. And on the cover, it has an excellent description. And I sort of wondered whether you'd been called upon to write it yourself, because it's very articulate. It's described as a collection that crosses boundaries of genre, time, history, and desire, meditating on how we create ourselves through culture and stories and why it matters. This seemed like a beautiful description to me of what it is and does. Can you tell us how this collection came about? It's I would say it's eclectic, but of a whole, the reading experience feels it feels like a narrative overall, even though it's made up of bits and pieces. So how did you come to put this together?
Well, long sort of story involving some of the people here today. When I started, I wrote poetry. Then I moved to fiction, and I also wrote some essays because I thought I need to make some money, and that turned into these massive things that did not make money but took up a lot of time and energy. And then gradually over time, sort of my essays moved closer to my fiction, and fiction got a bit of an essay, like something like Fatal Attraction. It's got that, you know, criticism as well as fiction, and things started to sort of blend together. But I always, this was many years ago, I sort of wanted to have a book of essays back when they were, you know, you were told, no one ever has a book of essays except for incredibly famous people that have had 20 books. And I thought, why can't a book of essays be a book on its own? But that was absolutely a no back in those days. It's great to see that that's changed. And so I have had all these bits and pieces that have come from different, you know, responding to different things, responding to invitations from ABC radio people to write on different topics, performances, stories, all these bits that didn't fit into, like, say, How to Conceive of a Girl or the other books. And for a long time, I wanted that to be a book of essays. And I was sort of thinking, well, this one's sort of an essay and this one's sort of an essay. And in fact, you know, Ralph Westman actually invited me to do that many years ago. And that was a lovely invitation. But in the end, I decided I didn't think it held together as a book. I didn't think it was a reading experience that people would cherish. And so I kind of hung on to it. And then when Spineless Wonders administers the Carmel Bird Digital Literary Award, which is an award for a short manuscript, 30,000 words of any form. And I met her at a festival and sort of so decided to just enter, and I won it, which was a big surprise. And so then I ended up with this little ebook of some of the material, but they didn't kind of hang together. They were just a bunch of things that I put together. So then it was a long process of sort of trying to work out how can I take that and make a book out of it. And interestingly, Sophie Amos, who I think is on here, was an intern. She applied to Spineless Wonders to be an intern. So Bromman rang me and sort of said, "Would you like to have an intern to get that book together?" So that description that you just read out, I think that line was actually one that Sophie wrote. So thank you, Sophie.
Poor Sophie.
And she was from Sydney Uni, your program. So thank you very much, Sophie. And having somebody else and having someone much younger, different generation, because I thought, is it only going to appeal to people who know the monkeys and, things like that, was really, really helpful to have that somebody to bounce off and to help work out, yes, these pieces, and then gradually forming the connections between them, the themes, why this, every piece had to sort of justify itself to be in there for some reason, and then working out the order so there's some kind of a subliminal trajectory to it. So yeah, that's how it came about.
It feels very contemporary to me. It feels sort of in various ways that I hope don't sound shallow. So one of the ways it felt contemporary to me was that it's made up of small parts. So it sort of works with our affected attention span these days, but is part of something bigger. It also felt contemporary. I mean, I found it completely compulsive, actually, and vagabondage too. And partly because you think you're about to read something small, but then you just keep going. And also because it seemed your writing seems, and going back and looking at previous writing, it seems to almost preempt the kind of auto-fiction thing. Particularly, I found this in Vagabondage that, sorry, this is very long-winded, Beth. One of the things I always think about this autofiction business and then poetry is that poetry has always done this. It's occupied this space where you have the I persona, and we don't ask that it be strictly factual or chronological or realist, and that in your collection Vagabondage, that sense that we are encountering experience through a kind of artful shaping of it feels very contemporary to me. It seems to be sort of what other forms have decided is all the rage, but that poetry was kind of ahead of the game on.
Yeah.
So all of this, when you talk about, I don't know whether people will get the references and so, well, I did, because I'm probably a similar age to you, but I don't think it matters. I think there's something about your work that really, it sort of preempts things that other people are suddenly deciding are fashionable.
That's great to hear. Thank you. And yes, it's been surprising the sort of, it's been surprising pieces people respond to. For example, a lot of people will contact me and say they loved Miss Propinquity. I wrote that in 1987. So it's sort of, you hang on to things and you keep building and something eventually finds its spot. And I think that's because of what I was saying before about that my first narrative language was montage. It was TV, and TV is sort of not only just the different programs, but you've got the cuts, the jump cuts and all that kind of stuff, and the way they communicate ideas. And then you've got the advertisements come in, you have a news flash. So that idea of receiving stories in that kind of very montagey, jumbled way, and you change the channel, and people would always come in and change the channel when Fantasyland was on when I was a child. And so I think that changes your brain in how you think. And so I think there is when you look at generations, I hate the way the generations are decided by demographics, like what year you were born. To me, it's like those cultural shifts, and TV was a big cultural shift, and it changed the way we experience the world and think. And then you've got the even more digital with the mobile phone age, and then you've got the YouTube age and all that kind of thing. Those things have totally changed. So for older people, we're catching up with the technology where it's instant. For those that were born to it. And so I think for me, I was born, I probably watched TV over while I was breastfeeding. And so that's a little bit closer to the digital current and stuff. But it is interesting. So like with Mr. Propinquity, I remember saying to Sophie, there's no mobile phones in it. Do you think people are going to notice? Sort of hopefully people just get engaged in it. And it's amazing, that people can just pick up those things. Also, I've started making a YouTube playlist. I should have sent you the link to that, so that if people want to have a different experience of it, they can go and look at the playlist and, go through the different things, see bits from Bewitched or Fatal Attraction or the Monkeys, but also just get atmosphere like the Red Rattler trains from the 70s. So I like having that kind of spin-off. So it's a montage within the book, it's montage within the stories, and then the book, and then also I think with my other work, but also out with the references as well. So yeah,
I love that. I love the playlist, because I was just thinking as you were speaking that I think another feature of your work is the sort of the mixture of, for want of better terms, high and low culture, the way that everything is part of the same thing. And I also have been finding that another aspect of that is that there's often a sort of a swerve in your pieces. So it's as though we're talking about one thing that might appear to be quite serious, and then there's a sort of a lightning or a different kind of element comes in, and it's like, oh, surprise. It's continually energizing in that way. And what I might do, rather than sort of flatter you and then ask you to respond, is to read us something.
You want me to read something?
Yes, please.
Oh, okay. So as we're talking about the montage, sorry, I've just got to get it up. I might read a little bit from the Age of Fibs.
Just while you're getting ready, I'm just going to say to the audience that they might like to start putting a few questions in the chat while you're reading, and we can consider those afterwards as well.
Okay. I might have to edit this as I go to cut it down a bit, sort of, but oh, look, I'll jump. I wanted to get to start. I don't like starting straight in with this paragraph, but otherwise it'll take too long. So I'll just go straight to this. So this is from the Age of Fibs, which is kind of going back to teenage years. And so sometimes at night I could feel my breasts against my upper arm when I lay on my side. I had to maneuver myself slightly to become comfortable. I loved this feeling. And once Anthony Braccio brushed his arm against me when we were mucking around, his blue-grey jumper and the blue-grey of my jumper, and millimetres below my newly sensitive nipples. The no-bra look is a myth. No woman older than 20 can go without a bra, and a panty girdle is needed by 50% of the population. Michael Herstrom from Hestia. Women can slim down their hips with dieting, but that doesn't help their busts. Brian Etelson from the Australian chairman of FormFit, and FormFit and Hestia are bra manufacturers. A great relief. The Clio team, circa 1972. It may have been a great relief to Ida Buttrose and the rest of the staff at Clio to abandon their foundation wear, but at 13, to have a bra was to control the lock. To have a bra was to have a midriff. Bras were like school uniforms. What they covered up and restrained, they also emphasised, rather like the way the Catholic girls always knew so much more about sex than we did. All that stuff about not being allowed hairbrushes with handles or patent leather shoes. A bra was the holy grail, glorious key to femininity and sexiness. And then, it's time. In the month Gough Whitlam, so there's more goes on to about how I got my first bra and then the perfect bra. In the month Gough Whitlam became Prime Minister of Australia, after 23 consecutive years of Conservative Liberal government, my mother gave me a Fibs bra for Christmas. I opened up the parcel expecting something usual and boring, and there it was, stunned happiness. So on the day the 7 newly released conscientious objectors sat down to their Christmas dinners at home rather than in prison, I stood in front of my bedroom window looking at my new midriff, this hallowed ground poised in between my orange striped bra and matching orange striped bikini pants. I shared something with Communist China that year, recognition, and Wilfred Burchett himself couldn't have been more pleased with his new passport than I was with mine. And I'll leave it there. It goes on to about the dismissal and the throwing away of the bra after that.
Fantastic, Beth. I might just ask you here about the ways that you bring certain elements together again. So that reading reminded me of the ways that you bring, again, I mean, even there's quite serious things going on. There's the historical backdrop, but also the control of women through garments and this male voice stipulating what's allowed and required. But at the same time, it's very funny. And that was something I found as well in your story in the collection, which I think is an older story, Fatal Attraction in Newtown. So in this story, I'm sure that many people here know it, but in it you reimagine the film, and the sort of radical move is this great sympathy for Alex, who will forever be known as the bunny boiler in popular culture, in a way that, you know, people treat that humorously, but it's a very serious business to call this woman this ridiculous name. And I think you sort of create a feminist fable by doing that, and sort of having the Newtown location as well in the involvement of your own life. So I'm wondering how you make these things go together. Has that ever been daunting to you, to make something that's clearly a subject of great seriousness to you? Feminism runs through your work. You know, that there's, I think, possibly rage or fury here as well, and humor, and to make it funny. Are there risks there? Are these things that you've always wanted to put together?
Well, so many ways I could go on that. For one thing, I just want to say that the 1960s feminists began with humor. You know, when the whole sort of bra trashing thing was, you know, it was theatrical, it was funny, it was a lot of, you know, this idea of dour feminist is really not true. It's always had a lot of humor, always had a lot of play with the language, with the culture and so on. With the reason I put that piece, Fatal Attraction in Newtown, in the book was because I just think it's tragic that it's so relevant still. And particularly if you look at things like the Amber Heard, Johnny Depp ghastly kind of business that's been going on, and the whole cultural Darvo thing, you know, deny, attack, reverse victim and offender, and so on. It was all sort of played out with the Amber Heard and the Johnny Depp thing, and I think you can see that in the film of Fatal Attraction as well, because if you look at the history, which is in the playlist of Fatal Attraction, they actually, you know, did a version of it where she was sort of this sad victim and he was a baddie, a bit of a baddie, and the audiences wanted her, you know, she was a homewrecker, and they wanted her to die much more violently, and that's why it sort of turned into this extraordinary, you know, it's still an extraordinary movie. I mean, it's apparently the bunny boiling scene is one of, you know, the top 10 most dramatic moments in film or something to some people, but it's sad that kind of cultural storytelling that is, you know, that women are the violent ones, that women are the perpetrators, that women are the, you know, they bring it on themselves, that they're the dangerous ones, especially if they sort of speak out or anything like that. I think that is still a really, really strong cultural story, unfortunately. So that's why that one ended up in there.
It felt sort of enragingly timely, reading that at this stage and watching. I remember sitting in the cinema with everyone calling loudly for her death, you know. And well,
that's like what's happening on, if you're on social media, or, you know, particularly things like YouTube and TikTok, the vitriolic kind of condemnation of Amber Heard is just extraordinary, you know. It's still playing out all the time.
It's horrible. Okay, so I'm just going to encourage the audience to give us their questions. You can give us them in the chat, but I will also stop talking at some point if you want to ask questions in person. But I just want to warn you that you will be on the recording, so make sure you're okay with that if you're going to speak. Here's quite a good question, so I will have a little rest. So Daryl is very interested to hear your comments about montage. And how important the jump cut is in your work.
Oh, curly question from Daryl Delora, filmmaker. I've never actually been 100% sure what a jump cut is. So as soon as I said that, I thought, oh, I shouldn't have said that. But that kind of, certainly the cutting of scenes, which is now very common in writing and fiction and so on, but was perhaps less common when I sort of started doing it. But that where you sort of, you're focused here and then you're focused there, and that, but rather than realism, which sort of, you know, you're more in the mind of either the narrator or the overall voice of the author, and you're being sort of guided very gently through the text. And I often sort of say that it's strange that we call that realism, because in reality, the only time you actually have this single sort of linear unfolding of something is in pages of a realist novel. I mean, I love realist novels, but it doesn't reflect my reality, and it doesn't reflect my reality of how I process or deal with or experience life. And I think also it becomes problematic because you've got that one view. And if I don't know, Daryl might want to have to say something about that, but the part of the shock or the innovation of Godard and people like that, who the jump cut, was that it disrupted that kind of smooth representation of reality, which is not, it's a fabrication. So I hope that sort of answers it a bit.
Well, I might build on Daryl's question then to think about this question of form. So you seem to have resisted, perhaps it was never an urge, but you haven't switched to writing a big continuous novel, or, you know, one of these forms that have been considered sort of central to at least commercial literary culture. And I wonder whether that has taken courage, effort, resistance, or whether it's just been completely natural to you to create these kind of hybrid, fragmented forms because they express something more persuasively for you.
Look, I would love to be a realist, a novelist, you know what I mean? I'd love to write humor. I'd love to sort of write a big book, but for a whole lot of reasons, you know, and I've wasted a lot of time trying to do that. And so I think it was Vagabondage actually, which sort of finally taught me to be the writer I am. And so I spent I hate to tell me how many years trying to write a novel, and I didn't enjoy it. It didn't kind of, I mean, I was still doing the montagey thing, but trying to sort of do bigger blocks and trying to bring it together more and have more characters and all that kind of thing. And it just exploded and became such a huge thing. And then I did it as a PhD. And so then I felt I had to research everything to death, and it became like 20 books and never got finished. Although the Age of Fibs is a little bit of that. So finally got a little bit in here. And when I did Vagabondage, I'd actually stopped writing. So I ended up, every time I would work on this big book, I would get so much pain in my body that it would take me days to get over. And so I eventually had to sort of look at the elephant in the room, that the writing was killing me. And I spent a lot of time, a lot of therapy to let go of that book, and to, I actually decided to give up writing. And that's when I sold my house, couldn't afford another house, so bought the camper van and lived in a camper van. And it was a very strange year and a very lost year for a lot of reasons. And then eventually I found this house, and a couple of years later I was just driving to the supermarket, and I had this idea of, well, what if I because I sort of missed writing, even though I sort of knew that the writing was killing me, it still was a hole, it was a loss. And so I was driving to the supermarket and I thought, what if I just wrote a little tiny book in poetry about that year in the van? Because no one will read it. And just to make sense of it myself and just to see if I can learn to write with joy again. So it was the two aims I had for that book. And then every time I'd start to think, oh, this is actually shaping into something. It's got themes, it's got this, it's got that. And then I'd start getting the pain back. It was like a weight. I was putting the weight on myself again of that it had to have this big thing. And so I'd had to keep tricking myself. No one's going to read it, just for me. And that's how I sort of finally got it done. And it was so extraordinary the way that connected with so many people. Even with very different lives to me, that it kind of sort of made me realize I just have to be the writer I am.
Yeah.
And I also around that time had to separate out writing as a career and just writing. And so I'd always sort of, wanted to that injunction that you've got to make money or it's not real. And so I think that had been driving me as well. So once I finally sort of said, I'm just doing this for me and putting it out. And I would love writing to be paid work. But sometimes, that was the contradiction in those sort of early kind of unconscious rules I made for myself, is that if you're going to try and do something different, then it's not going to be easy to make money from that. Most of the writing in Australia that makes money is either, as you say, commercial fiction, or it's paid for by advertising in newspapers and so on. And so to put that expectation on my writing, that this kind of writing would make money, was kind of crushing me. So I had to actually take that off. So
fine. Yeah, that sounds like a crystallization of a sort of common set of decisions and processes, I think. I'm pretty glad you wrote Vagabondage, but sorry, there was the pain.
No, it was wonderful because it was a delight to write, because I'd taken that pressure off. So it got me back into writing with joy. But also when you think about it, how many art forms other than writing is that huge injunction to make money? And just pleasurable or interesting or challenging endeavors that we do. I mean, people climb Mount Everest and they spend a lot of money and a lot of time to do it. And nobody says, did you make money from it? And did you have an audience? You spend a lot of time in your garden, and nobody says, have you been in a garden magazine? Why do it? You get better at tennis just because you want to get better at tennis. But for some reason with writing, there's that whole thing of, has it been published? How many pieces did you sell? That kind of thing.
Even amongst other art forms, it's perfectly acceptable to make music, and for that to be, everyone understands that is a human, pleasurable, expressive way to spend your time.
And that you grow from it. You grow and you connect and you change from doing it. It's a worthwhile thing. Yeah.
So we've got some questions. So the first one you may not be able to see because I think it's just come to me, but it's definitely to you. So Bruce Parr asks, Beth, your dad was more than humble farmer and farrier. He reached the top echelon of VFL. To what extent is your own success due to a similar determination and pursuit of excellence?
My dad played 13 games for Hawthorn, and there's a piece in the book called Playing the Man that is about that kind of complex thing of sport in the culture and the gendered thing of it, a whole lot of aspects to it. When I grew up, I don't even remember it ever being talked about that Dad played for Hawthorn. It just wasn't a thing. And I look back at it now and I think, gosh, that would have given me a lot of cachet at school if I had talked about that, but we never did. But so it wasn't like it was there as an example of that. But I think he very much was of the, like I remember him saying he had a troublesome apprentice once, and I said, why did you hire him? When I interviewed him later in life, and he said, oh, well, I saw him, a horse bucked him off and he got straight back up on again. So I thought I'd give him a job. And that was his attitude. It was sort of like, you just got to get back up on the horse again. And so maybe, yeah, that determination. Look, it's a complex mess which you get from your family, isn't it? So I'm still unpicking a lot of the things that perhaps not so useful to be a writer, but there's so much else that was rich about my background that I'm very grateful to. Thanks, Bruce.
Yes, that's the funny thing about being a writer, isn't it? It's sort of the good stuff and the bad stuff, and particularly the complicated stuff can be quite fruitful. Beth Yap asks, well, she says first, it was so wonderful to hear you read, Beth. Could I ask about the place of research in your work, for example, in the Age of Fibs? Many of our research students in creative writing would be interested in the balance you achieve between the information and art in your work. So beautifully put. Thank you, Beth.
I think it's difficult to not research something to death. So I always pick topics that I like researching. I sort of want to sort of say this, how I did things and stuff, but I also want to say, don't do what I did, because, it led to sort of things taking a long time. I mean, I can't tell you how long some of those pieces took to piece together and to get that flow happening and to insert the informational sort of, or the content sort of part of it. I keep a lot of records. I do a lot of research. I have lots of pieces of papers. I have things all over the wall. I use Scrivener. I used to use FileMaker. Sometimes being able to collect and sort your research can actually be a problem, because then it's there and you want to use it. So there is that thing of sort of doing it all, letting it change you, grabbing the bits that you want to, but trying not to cram everything in. And I think with that novel that failed, it was called A Short Personal History of the Bra and Its Contents. So it covered everything. And I think it just fell under the weight of the research. And then I had all this research, and that was back before I started researching it, before there was a lot of stuff on the internet. So this was finding stuff in books and newspapers and all the rest of it. And so then you want to use it, and it can just weigh it down. So you've just got to trust that it has gone in there in some way, and it's going to reflect on everything you write, and then just use little pieces of it to kind of connect it back out to that archive. I hope that helps in some way.
That's beautifully put. It's something I enjoy in your work is that lightness, the not being weighed down. These things are there. The illusion, rather than the substance. I think I can't remember the quote, but Annie Dillard talking about we don't need to see what it cost you to.
Yes. Yeah, you want to make it look easy. Yeah.
Take the price tag off.
I'll take the price tag off. I love that.
So Kath Kenny, hello Kath, I met you the other week. So this is a practical question of sorts. I love your blend of fiction and non-fiction and prose poetry, but I'm curious about how publishers, booksellers and libraries fit your book into categories that demand you're one or the other.
Yeah, they don't. It makes it very difficult. One of the things I've kind of learnt to do to sort of keep myself going is to try and, when I do a book, to try and work out ways to not just see it as a product, like, the normal way of doing a book. You do a book, it goes into bookshops, it goes to readers, it's a product, and it's got that nice straight line, reviewers on the way, and it's read and so on. Whereas I've sort of learnt, because my books are very unusual, to see each book as a kind of like an event that has a whole lot of spin-off events, if possible. And so, for example, Vagabondage sold well for a poetry book. Thank you, UWP and Terry Ann White, for getting it into bookshops. And it did actually, compared to a poetry book, it sold quite well. Compared to fiction, it sold very, very small. But in that, there was a piece called Forgetting, which I pitched to Claudia Taranto at ABC Radio, because I developed a relationship with her over the years and she's become a good friend. And so I did a reading of that I scripted in some sounds and things, and I did a reading of that, and it went on radio, and it was repeated about 5 times. I mean, it's about my relationship with my mum as she had dementia. And so each time that's sort of potentially 80,000 people that might tune into Life Matters or something. And then it got picked up as Best of the Web. And so then it got even more, from the podcasting and so on. So even though the book itself might have only got to, 500 readers, having these sort of little spin-offs like that, or even something like this, it's an event. It's a work in itself, and that might go out further and so on and have an influence. So rather than, I'll drive myself crazy if I just look at the sales figures or compare yourself to novels or something like that. But if I can find with each book something that can spin off. And with the Age of Fibs, things have really closed down at the ABC. They don't do much with freelancers anymore or text-based stuff. It's hard I don't have contacts at the Age anymore. So it's more in the past that there are those threads going out. I mean, even though the Age of Fibs is hard to categorize, hard to get into shops, might not have many actual copies out there, that a lot of those pieces, like the footy piece, for example, I think it was originally on ABC, so it would have had, repeated there about 4 times or 5, more than that. And then it went into the Age, and it was published in the Age for the grand final one year. So there's another sort of 50,000 people or whatever, and it's been in a few different places. So it's finding those ways, even if the whole book can't fit the way books are marketed and sold at the moment, if you can sort of try and make it worthwhile in some aspect of it. So I wouldn't have got the footy piece into the Age, except that I produced a CD and a CD-ROM, which is another whole story I won't go into. And that created an event, which then gave me a chance to pitch to the Age for that, they could a hook to sort of, I've had this book, so therefore, would you be interested in this? So it's using the book as like an elaborate calling card and as a hook for other events and a way to get into the cultural conversation. So for me, it's not about selling books. I'd love to sell lots of books or have lots of readers, but the main thing is to get into the cultural conversation. And the book is one of those vehicles to do that. And also getting your work in a body. That's made a massive difference to me. The things that have, I've had things published in really great places, but if they're just individual things, it just disappears. Whereas when you bring it together in that body, it's got, and it's like, you build a forest rather than just have a little individual plant out there on its own. So that's another reason to have the book, is that you've got that body of work that you're building.
Yeah, I think that there's so much there that I would love to follow up on, but I won't, because we have more questions and coming up to the hour. But so much there of practical use to students. I think that idea of you make something, there's more than one way to read its impact, and that actually what you're doing is joining a conversation. You're not really here to sell books. Some of you might sell some books, but don't let that be.
That's right. Don't drive yourself mad by looking at those figures. Yeah.
We could all swap royalty statements and still.
Also, the other thing I'm learning, I think a lot of it's a facade. A lot of it is sort of is people are sort of encouraged to look like they're doing really well when maybe it's not happening. So don't ever compare yourself to others, because you're not even comparing yourself to reality.
No, that's right. It's the show reel. Okay, I think the next question is sort of solidarity rather than anything else. Who expects to make money from poetry? So we have some lovely comments. And then the next question, I think, is from Maggie. So it says, Maggie Ball says, one of the many nice things about the pieces in the Age of Fibs is how much space you leave for the reader to engage and create their own meaning. Now that the book has been out for a while, have you found that reader perceptions and feedback have changed the way you yourself view the stories their meanings and interactions with one another. What fantastic questions we're getting.
Maggie Ball, by the way, is she runs Compulsive Reader podcast, and she's a fantastic interviewer, so check out her podcast. Yes, it does. Everybody brings their own energy to it, and their feedback to it alters. It's the whole thing is a continuing conversation backwards and forwards, and it's going to change what I write next. And one of the things I personally find satisfying about having that kind of montage form is the number of people that sort of they're not locked in. So, like, say for example, if they read the Age of Fibs, they don't just stay in my head and what I've sort of devised for them. They go off on all these memories of their own, about their own experiences, and they'll often write to me and tell me their own experiences about, bras and whatever, or families and so on. And I like that because it's like we're presented at the moment. I only have my experience as a girl growing up in a white family and so on. I would love to have diversity, but it's like the way we're presented to do that is to have diverse characters in your book. Whereas I'm hoping that by having all these sort of this montage and the gaps and the spaces for people to bring their own, and the contrast in the voices, which also allows you to sort of go back into somewhere else, that's a way people can bring their own experiences into the text without me having to then try and imagine myself into another person's experience, which I have problems with. And so, yes, I hope it's that kind of sort of a slightly opening text that allows lots of different readings, lots of different interactions to it, and that is not closing up. Because, a lot of sort of feminist stuff is written, and a lot of feminist books are written on identity, that you identify with the heroine, you sympathize with the heroine. And if you don't, or if you had a very different thing, you're kind of thrown out of the text. I hope, it may not work that way, but I would hope that sort of my text perhaps hopefully doesn't throw people out as much, because you can stay in the text and go, no, that wasn't my, that we is not me, at the same time as still engage with it and get interest in it and keep inserting yourself into it.
It's very funny because when you were reading from that story at the beginning, I was off in a memory tunnel. Okay, so I might just check with you, Beth, if we run over slightly. Is that okay?
That's okay with me. That's okay with others.
Questions. Yeah. I won't keep. If people have to leave, we won't take it as much.
Thank you for everybody that came, because as I say, everybody's contribution, even if it's just their sort of reading of things, is really important to writers.
Yeah, and this turning up business is gold. Thank you. Hazel, hello Hazel. How did you think about the structure of the Age of Fibs? How did you arrive at the order of the pieces?
Well, that was difficult. So I brought in a lot of factors, like sort of, you put everything on cards, you put it up on a wall, you look at what, where there's a connection that might lead from one to the other, where they're not too similar. So, but then you also don't want them to be too similar. And then I wanted to add new energy to it, so like new pieces. So I had a lot of microfiction pieces. And so I would try and sort of space them out to give the energy. And it's almost like they kind of run through as another kind of a thread that brings it together. And I've always just had that sense that the true story of an escape artist is kind of the ending. So I sort of knew that was going to be the ending. The Bewitching, Sophie had never actually heard of Bewitched, so she was a bit lost in that. But then we made some tweaks to it. I realized I had to actually use the word television program or something early in it to orient the reader. And then, I don't know, Fatal Attraction just seemed like, sadly, so contemporary still, that I wanted to put that up front, even though I know that that's taking a risk, because a lot of people get stuck on that one if they're not in the mood to actually. It's quite a demanding piece, and if they're not in the mood for it, they can put the book down and not go back to it at all. So there's been a couple of people that I've sensed didn't get past that, and I just say, start at the back, start at the last one, and then they work their way back and start to enjoy it. But so that was a risk, putting something that was quite demanding in some ways. So it's been great to see that a lot of people have just read through, but yeah, I think a lot of people fall at that hurdle. But there's always a risk. You can't do something that's going to please everybody. And I don't know, it's just by feel a lot of the time, and back and forth until you finally sort of get this little thing happening where there is enough. And it's like, if you have something that sort of is here that has a reference that leaps into this story, you want to have it close enough that the leap can be made, but not too close that it becomes, oh yeah, you know what I mean? So you want to, it's always that tension of giving the reader enough so that they still stay, it's still pleasurable, but stretching it just a little bit to that point where they have to work just enough that it becomes even more pleasurable because they got it. So I guess it's the same processes that I used when I make the pieces themselves, sort of playing around with lots of little bits and moving them around for hours. Yeah.
And there's a kind of, I think, music in the variation in lengths that's compelling too. I think that really sort of drives the reading on. I mean, in a practical sense, I'm reading before I go to bed, and I think, oh, there's just a little another one in that I find I'm still there, but also in a sense of, okay, so that story is quite meaty, and then to have some short pieces that vary the tone and the feel a little bit. I'll keep on with the questions. So Dinah, if you're still here, and others, Dinah has asked how to see the recording. If it's all right with Beth, I'll share it on Twitter. And I expect Beth will share it on Facebook, maybe.
We might put it on YouTube, maybe.
Yes, there will be. So we have a YouTube channel, and where guests are okay with it, I will share it to the YouTube channel and then put a link in social media to guide people to it. So it will be available if you look up one of us.
And there's some on the Sydney Uni YouTube channel, there's some really good conversations there. Yeah,
that was one of the blessings of the switch to Zoom is that Beth Yarp had previously had these conversations, but they were live, and now we have some kind of record of the more recent ones. Okay, so ones that are questions. I saw some more. I saw one from Shan, I think. Where was that? Shan Pryor. Shan, I hope you're still here. Oh no, it was a comment. I thought it was a question. I think they're comments now. Sorry to be doing this in a slightly distracted looking way. Yes, they are comments. All right, so it's just left to me. That's not too bad. 2 minutes past. I didn't.
Pretty good. Yeah.
Thank you so much to everybody for coming. It's so wonderful to see you here. This is the literary community that we love to see in action. Thank you so much, Beth, for just an incredibly fertile conversation. Everything you said, I could have asked you another 5 questions about, but felt the need to rattle on through. But thank you enormously. It's been wonderful.
Thank you so much, and thanks everyone for coming and for reading. I appreciate it so much.
So